Have you ever watched the news, seen a big flashy headline about job numbers, and just wondered who exactly counts as unemployed in a massive, rapidly shifting nation of 1.4 billion people? Like, is it literally anyone without a job? Is it just the people out there actively handing out resumes? Today, we're going completely behind the scenes of those headlines to figure out exactly how these massive numbers are calculated. Welcome to today's explainer on decoding India's unemployment metrics. I'm super excited to have you here. If you're the kind of learner who wants to cut right through all that bureaucratic jargon and just get straight to the facts, well, you are in the perfect place. We're going to break down the complex formulas and the really strict timelines that define employment on paper. So let's dive right in. But hey, before we really get going, I just want to briefly acknowledge our source material for today. The charts, definitions, and the data we're exploring are pulled directly from the bilingual educational materials provided by Study IQ IAS. These are specifically designed to help exam aspirants deeply understand these exact governmental metrics.
Okay, here is our roadmap for today. 1. Defining unemployment. 2. Sources of data. 3. The shift to the PLFS. 4. Key labor metrics. And 5. Measuring activity statuses. Let's hit it.
Section 1. Defining unemployment. What does it actually mean to be jobless? You might actually be surprised to learn that simply not having a job doesn't automatically make you unemployed on paper. What's really fascinating about the specific criteria from the National Statistical Office, or NSO, is that they define unemployment as a situation where people are lacking work, but, and this is the absolutely crucial part, they are actively seeking it. That means going through employment exchanges, asking friends or relatives, sending out applications, or explicitly saying they are available for work under current conditions. Basically, if you aren't looking or you aren't available, you aren't officially unemployed by this metric. And that leads us perfectly into how it's measured. Take a look at this formula. The unemployment rate equals unemployed workers divided by the total labor force, all multiplied by 100. The really important thing to notice here is the denominator. You are dividing by the total labor force, not the entire population of the country. So if you're a full-time student or a retired grandparent, you aren't in a labor force, so you literally aren't part of this equation.
Moving in right along to Section 2, Sources of Data. Where do these numbers actually come from? Gathering data for a country this massive is a monumental task. The government basically relies on 3 main pillars for this data. First, we have the reports of the Census of India. Second, the NSO's Periodic Labor Force Survey, which we'll just call the PLFS. And third, the Directorate General of Employment, or DGE, which collects data from employment exchanges, essentially the folks who walk in and formally register that they need a job. Let's look a bit closer at that first pillar, the census. The census is this incredibly systematic procedure to record population data, and it has a remarkably long history in India. It actually started all the way back in 1872 under British Viceroy Lord Mayo. Then we got the first complete one in 1881. After 1949, it shifted over to the Registrar General. Now, these are designed to happen every 10 years. The last one was in 2011, and the 2021 census, well, as you might guess, that had to be postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Section 3, the shift to PLFS, or upgrading the survey system. Because honestly, relying on 10-year-old data just isn't fast enough anymore. For the longest time, the reliable estimates came from the National Sample Survey Office, the NSSO. But their surveys were quinquennial, meaning they only happened every 5 years. The last one of those was in 2011-12. If you're trying to manage a fast-moving modern economy, 5-year-old data is basically ancient history. Recognizing they needed more frequent updates, the NSO launched a massive upgrade, the Periodic Labor Force Survey, or PLFS, in April 2017. The PLFS was designed with a super clear dual objective. First, it estimates key indicators in a really short window, just 3 months, specifically for urban areas. Second, it measures parameters annually for both rural and urban areas. This is such a smart approach because it gives the government these rapid, highly frequent snapshots of fast-changing urban job markets while still keeping a solid annual baseline for the entire country. All right, on to Section 4, Key Labor Metrics. Let's decode the alphabet soup. Think of this as your cheat sheet for the 3 most important acronyms you need to know. First up is the LFPR, the Labor Force Participation Rate. This simply evaluates the working age population actually participating in the economy. Next is the WPR, the Worker Population Ratio. The formula is total workers divided by the total population. Notice that one looks at the entire population. And finally, the UR, the unemployment rate, which we looked at earlier. Remember, unlike the WPR, the UR strictly looks at the percentage of unemployed people only among those who are actively in the labor force.
Finally, Section 5, measuring activity statuses, the strict metrics of time.
So, how exactly does a surveyor decide if you fall into one of those acronyms? Well, one of the main tools used by the PLFS for those quarterly urban updates is the Current Weekly Status, or CWS. It looks at the week right before the survey. And here is where it gets highly specific and, honestly, a bit wild. Under this metric, a person is regarded as employed if they engaged in any economic activity for at least one single hour on at least one day in the last 7 days. Think about that for a second. If you worked just one single hour on a Tuesday and, say, watched TV the rest of the week, congratulations! Under the CWS framework, the government considers you fully employed.
Now, to kind of catch the obvious gaps in that logic, we have the daily status approach. This method records your activity status for each individual day and the reference week. It's considered the most inclusive approach because it actually captures the specific days of unemployment for folks who might have been marked as employed under that weekly status. It essentially catches the 6 days you didn't work, even if the 1-hour weekly rule says you're technically employed. But these methodologies are always shifting based on administrative needs and resources. A really surprising fact from our source material notes that the Labor Bureau of India actually stopped computing data related to UR, LFPR, and WPR based on those specific weekly and daily approaches back in 2013-14. It's a great reminder that the ways we measure economies are literally constantly evolving.
Now, to contrast that strict, hyper-focused weekly view, let's look at the macro view, the usual principal activity status, or UPA. I'll read this right off the source material. It is determined using the majority time criterion, only those persons as being unemployed who had no gainful work for a major time during the 365 days preceding the survey. This is the big picture. It classifies you based on what you spent the longer part of your entire year doing.
We've covered a ton of ground today, right? From the basic definitions of seeking work all the way to the strict thresholds of time like the 365-day macro view or that crazy 1-hour weekly rule. But I really want to leave you with a provocative thought to ponder. If our fast-paced data relies on thresholds like working just 1 hour in a week to categorize someone as employed, how many of the people making up those positive employment headlines are actually just heavily underemployed? It fundamentally changes how you look at the statistics you see on the news, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep questioning the data, keep analyzing those metrics, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.